He left me to rot in intensive care. Days later, he fell to his knees begging for my inheritance. I chewed the paper and spat the pieces back in his face. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My name is Richard. I am 68, retired from 4 decades as an electrician who learned early that a house tells you what it needs if you listen to it. A hum in the breaker panel, a warm plate on the outlet, a flicker that means the switch is tired. People are not so different. My wife, Nora, used to say I could fix anything that sat still on a table long enough. On Saturday mornings, she would put a broken toaster next to my coffee and call it a date. She taught 3rd grade for 38 years and brought home construction paper confetti in her hair. I brought home knuckles scraped by old screws and stories about men who swore the light had always done that. Our son, Caleb, grew up on a cul-de-sac where bike tires left new moons in the dust. We did not have much extra, but we had enough. He played shortstop until he discovered he preferred the predictability of calculators to grounders that hopped. I remember the summer he was 12. The workshop window he shattered with a foul ball. The way he went white when the glass fell. I did not yell. I taught him how to measure and replace a pane. You break it, you fix it, I said. He nodded like a boy taking an oath. Then he became a man with a pressed shirt and a job that made him speak in gentle euphemisms for money. He married Tessa, who smiled like a magazine but measured conversations and how much they might cost. Together they gave me Ellie, a granddaughter who has my wife's eyes and my tendency to narrate everything she does out loud. Grandpa, hold the bag. Grandpa, that worm is having a wonderful day. Grandpa, do not tell Grandma I fed the dog my peas. You can live your whole life and think you have seen all the good there is, and then a small hand finds yours on the way across a parking lot. If you had walked past our house 3 years ago, you would have seen a life in working order. Nora's daffodils framed the walkway, a deliberate burst of yellow that made spring feel official. There was a porch swing I keep oiled out of habit. There was the jar on our dresser labeled library money, where Nora tucked spare bills and the occasional coin like she was building a nest for a bird she could not wait to hear. Sundays were chicken in the oven and photos on the fridge held up by magnets shaped like fruit. Caleb and Tessa came most weeks. Caleb carried dessert in a bakery box and set it just so on the counter. Tessa wiped imaginary streaks from the stainless steel and told me I should consider a cleaning lady at your age, Dad, with a laugh that meant it was not a joke. Ellie bounced from couch to couch, her socks mispaired on principle. We were fine. Not perfect, no one is, but fine enough that people waved when they drove by. The kind of fine that fits in a Christmas letter. It began to slip after Nora's cough turned from winter nuisance to something that made her lean against the doorframe and rest. The test took too long. The diagnosis arrived like a late train that somehow still surprised you. We fought it until we were fighting fatigue instead. Nora insisted on school until her principal took her hand and said she had done enough. She taped a felt heart to the staff room fridge that read, "Be kind" or "Be quiet," and came home to the couch with the blanket the PTA had knitted for her. On the days she felt strong, we visited the garden. She would touch the dirt like it was reading Braille and say, "Make sure someone waters the radishes if I forget." Caleb visited. He brought practical things, meal subscriptions, pill organizers with letters big enough to read from across the room. He stood in the doorway more than he sat, the way some men do in hospital rooms when their suit jackets creak at the seams. He asked for updates and wrote them on his phone like we were a project with milestones. Tessa delivered tulips that did not smell like anything and smoothed the edges of throw blankets that did not need smoothing. She took to calling me Mr. Hale, as if that were helpful distance. Ellie colored and fell asleep with her head on Nora's lap, while I read aloud from a gardening book like we were studying for a test. When the hospice nurse folded her hands and looked at me the way people do before they tell you the worst thing, the house went very quiet. People tell you the moment of death is a full stop. For me, it was a comma. There were 100 things still mid-sentence. The daffodils were just green spears. The library jar held $17 and a pair of quarters. The porch swing needed oil. Nora's pillow still wore the shape of her. I slept on my side of the bed that night because habit is heavier than grief. The funeral was the sort of blur that photographs cannot catch. There were casseroles in foil that tasted like salt and sorrow. Former students, now grown with their own children, lined up to tell me how she had kept extra mittens in her desk and an extra kindness in her voice. I stood by the receiving line and watched all the small ways a town tries to hold you up when it knows you will fall. Caleb handled the program. He likes the feeling of steering. He chose a hymn Nora loved and a quote about teaching that she had put on her classroom door every September. He looked handsome and vaguely offended by the concept of death. When it was over, when the last car had pulled away and the house had the hollow sound of a church after the choir has packed up, we sat at the kitchen table. That is where the shift began. It was not loud. It did not announce itself. It slid in under the door and took a seat like it had been invited. "Dad," Caleb said, laying his hand on the table like a notary, "you should not be alone in this house." "It is too much. We can look at nicer condos near us. Something with elevators. Safer." "Safer than my own stairs?" I asked, not unkindly. He considered. "More practical." Tessa nodded. "It is so much to maintain. You cannot be expected to do all this. You could sell while the market is still good. We can help with the paperwork." I looked at the refrigerator, covered in photos that needed no frames. Nora with a paper crown at a retirement party. Ellie with a gap-toothed grin. A picture of me and Caleb in baseball caps, his elbow slung on my shoulder like a wish. Practical is a word that can mean love. It can also mean removal. "It has only been a week," I said. "Let us let the flowers wilt before we move them." "Of course," Caleb said, hurt that I had heard what I heard. "I am only thinking ahead." Ahead for him is often a column of numbers marching in orderly rows. Ahead for me was the grass rising over the place where the ground had broken and been made smooth again. Our neighbor Earl came by that night with 2 coffees and sat without talking until it grew dark enough for the porch light to click on. He is a man who understands that silence can be a rope. From there, the small pressures multiplied. A brochure for active senior communities left on the counter after Sunday dinner. Tessa's thin mouth when I refused her offer to streamline your bills by consolidating accounts, which sounded like 30 years of habit being swept into a bucket. "It is for your own good," she said once, a sentence that always pricks my skin. Caleb started counting the steps when he came over, eyes flicking to the banister as though it were a threat. Ellie still jumped into my lap, and for a while that was enough to keep the room bright. I told myself we were adjusting. Families do. One person leaves and everyone else shifts a little to balance the boat. I did not yet know that Nora had been doing more balancing than I had seen, that she had been the soft translation between my way and theirs, stitching closeness in the quiet where I thought it had been growing on its own. After she was gone, the stitches showed. Normal did not return. Instead, one morning my breath went short and would not lengthen, and the floor of my life tilted. I was halfway down the stairs with a watering can when the world tipped like a boat in wake. Breath that had always arrived without announcement suddenly hung back. I set the can on a step, put my palm to the wall, waited for the room to settle. It did not. Tightness slid up under my ribs like a fist. I tried one more step and my right knee gave. The can clanged and water ran like a slick tongue down the wood. I grabbed the banister, missed, and took the rest of the stairs in an ugly, slow tumble, the kind you think you can stop until you learn you cannot. At the bottom, I lay on the rug and counted the pattern while my chest argued with air. I do not remember dialing, but Earl must have found me. He keeps a spare key under the stone turtle by the porch fern and thinks I do not know. "Easy, buddy," he said, voice somewhere over my shoulder, as if it could catch me. Help is coming. Sirens folded into the house like a bad chorus. Hands lifted my shirt, pressed cold discs to my chest, strapped a mask over my face that made the air smell like a wet coin. I tried to tell them about Nora's daffodils and got only a cough for my trouble. It became worse fast. The mask did not help enough. The paramedic's calm voice began to use words like saturation and failure. The ride was lights and ceiling, and a young man's eyes trying to be older than they were. In the emergency room, the doctor spoke slowly so the words could land in what was left of me. We are going to help you breathe. A tube, a light, a countdown I could not finish. Then a door closed somewhere, and the world narrowed to a quiet tunnel. The first morning I remember in the intensive care unit, a nurse was explaining the plastic tube in my throat like it was a misbehaving child. "Breathe with it, Mr. Hale," she murmured. "Let it help you." Her badge read Rosa. I nodded because that was all I had. Nods and blinking. Machines did the talking. The heart monitor spoke in metronome, the blood pressure cuff in squeezes. The pain in my ribs kept time with both. At 68, I was not ready to be a collection of tubes. I still was a grandfather who still lifted my granddaughter Ellie into the truck after school. A retired electrician with hands that could still fix anything you set on a table. And I was a widower who slept on one side of the bed because Nora's pillow still held the shape of her. 38 years she taught third grade and said the only thing a classroom ever needed more of was decent books and softer voices. Rosa tucked a clipboard under her arm and leaned so I could see her face, not just the blue mask and the halo of the overhead light. "We are partners today," she said. "You breathe in when the machine pushes, out when it rests. You and it are not enemies." She set a clear plastic box on the bedside tray, showed me the floating ball inside, tapped the side with one nail. "Later we will use this to get your lungs working hard again. For now, just ride with me." I rode. The ventilator breathed on a rhythm I had to learn the way you learn a new dance, by letting yourself be led first. Panic came anyway, sudden and hot, making my hands claw. Rosa caught them, slid soft mitts over my fingers so I would not pull the tube in a moment of stupid terror. "You are safe," she said, and I believed her because the alternative was a pit. The room became a collection of small, sharp details. A clock that insisted morning existed. The cold bite of a suction catheter when they cleared the tube. The way the ventilator sighed like a tired animal. A window that showed only a slice of sky but still managed to change color as day pushed its way across it. Once Rosa moved my bed so I could see a potted plant on the sill in the hall, a stubborn little fern that looked like it still had some arguing left in it. "Mascot," she said. I tried to ask for a pen with my eyes. Rosa understood and put a marker in my hand, a pad on my lap. What came out was a series of broken lines and a shaky N. I meant Nora. Rosa touched the N with her finger and nodded once. "I have got you," she said. Two doctors hovered later, one speaking in a voice he thought was kind, predicting timelines that were simply numbers to me, days on the machine, weeks in rehab, months before I would be myself again. I wanted to tell him I had already decided what self I would be, that men like me do not bend without a plan. Instead, I watched the monitor and counted. If I could stack enough breaths, I could make a ladder out of them. When the social worker came to ask about family, I blinked and nodded at the name she wrote. "Caleb. My son." She smiled like she had done a good job and pulled the curtain closed. The machines kept talking. Somewhere down the hall someone laughed, and the ordinary sound of it felt like a promise I could still keep if I did not let go. Nights in intensive care are longer than any clock admits. Between the hiss of the ventilator and the hard, clean light, sleep came in shards. When it did, Nora was there, wearing her school lanyard and that cardigan with the elbow patches, telling me to breathe the way she taught her third graders to read, slowly, on purpose, line by line. Then I would wake to the weight in my chest, and the animal part of me would panic, thrash against the tube, and Rosa would lay her palm on my sternum and say, "You are here. Stay with me." There was a moment, more than one, when I was not sure I could. Pain has a voice when it thinks you are alone. It told me this was too much, that men my age do not climb out of holes like this without a hand pulling them. I had always been the hand. Now I needed one. I scribbled "Caleb" on the pad and showed Rosa. She nodded, gentle and professional. "He has been notified," she said. "Visiting is at 10. I stared at the little plastic clock on the wall as if I could drag its hands forward with my eyes. I bargained with myself like a fool. Hold on until 10, hold on until 10, and then you can decide about the rest. 10 came with the squeak of shoes and the murmur of families doing their best in bad rooms. It brought a woman whispering a prayer into her father's hair, a teenager pretending not to cry into his hoodie. It did not bring my son. The nurse wrote "delayed" on my notepad without judgment. I watched the door until the minute hand clicked past visiting time, and the light shifted a degree toward noon. Somewhere a tray clattered. Rosa refilled my water and did not say maybe traffic, because she is not a liar. I made a deal with myself for the next window. Hold on until 4. At 4 he came, smelling like a car with the air still on. He did not step all the way in at first, as if the room might stain his jacket. His eyes did a quick circuit, mask, tube, numbers, and paused on the monitor the way a man glances at a stock ticker he does not own. He put 2 fingers on the bed rail instead of my hand. "Wow, Dad," he said. "This is a lot." I nodded. It took more strength than it should have. He turned to Rosa. "How long do you think he will be here?" "We have work, and daycare pickups, and—" He stopped himself, arranged his face into sympathy. "I mean, we want to plan." Rosa gave him the kind answer that still told the truth. "It depends. Some people need a few days on support. Some need longer. Rehab after rehab," he repeated, tasting the word like a bill. His phone buzzed. He glanced, thumbed a reply fast, then slid it away with theatrical care. "We might need to make some decisions about the house while this is ongoing. Security, mail, utilities. Tessa's parents are between places. They could keep an eye on things. Maybe move in for a while so it is not sitting empty." The tube made conversation a slow-motion sport. I wrote Ellie on the pad, underlining it twice. He read it and brightened, relieved to be on safer ground. "She made you a card," he said, patting his jacket like a magician searching for a rabbit he forgot to bring. "Next time." She had a play date. I nodded again. The ventilator sighed for me. He stood 3 more minutes. He told me my doctor seemed competent, that the parking was a nightmare, that the coffee downstairs was not bad for a hospital. He did not ask if I was scared. He did not say I look like hell, but I am here. He did not move his hand from the rail to mine. When he left, he said, "I will talk to the social worker about discharge options," like we were rescheduling a meeting. After the door clicked, Rosa adjusted my pillow and looked at me a long second, the way people look at a man who has just had a truth land on his chest heavier than any machine. "You did good," she said softly. "Breathe with me." I did. I rode the machine's push and pull, not for a son who could not see past logistics, but because somewhere a little girl was drawing daffodils and saving stories for a grandpa she believed would come home. The room hummed its hard lullaby. I waited for the next day anyway, because some habits you do not break all at once. And in the waiting, I learned something I had not wanted to learn. Wanting to be wanted is not the same as being held. The second night broke me open. Fever ran its nails along my spine, and the machine's rhythm stuttered just enough to make every breath feel borrowed. My mouth tasted like metal and old pennies. When they rolled me to change the sheets, pain pinned me through the ribs, and I saw white around the edges of the world. A doctor in pale blue said the word sepsis, and Rosa said we were on it. They hung a new bag, and the cold ran into my arm as if winter had learned to drip. I wanted to be the man who could ride it out without flinching. I was not that man. I was a grandfather counting to 4 on the inhale so I could get to 5. There was a stretch, somewhere before dawn, when I wanted to let go. I could see how easy it would be to stop arguing with the air, to sink and let the quiet have me. If you have never been that tired, you do not know how sweet surrender can sound. I closed my eyes and saw Nora's classroom, the rug with the alphabet on it, her voice saying, "Line by line, Mr. Hale." Then Ellie's hand appeared, small and stubborn, holding out a crayon drawing of daffodils that looked like suns with green legs. I told myself out loud inside my skull, "Hold on," not because it is brave, because a promise is a rope, and mine was still tied to a little girl in a garden. On day 3 or maybe day 4, time melted into the fluorescent haze. A social worker drew the curtain around my bed to talk to family. I could not talk, but I could listen. God gave me ears, and that day they worked just fine. "I have discussed the options," the voice said. "My son, Caleb." Cool, tidy vowels like a man doing a business presentation. "He is not built for months of therapy. The cost of a step-down facility is significant." Significant. I watched the green line of my heart rate creep up like it was trying to look over a fence. I tried to slow it with thoughts of fishing at dawn, the way water goes flat as glass just before the first cast. The social worker's voice was gentle, the tone people learn when their job is to be the soft landing under bad news. She began to say something about plans and progress. Caleb cut in, floating the words the way a man tests water with a toe. "If he does not make it, we should have his affairs aligned. My wife's parents are between homes. It would be a relief to transfer the house quickly." Relief. He said it like a man feels proud of seeing a shortcut on a map. The curtain rustled. Another voice, Tessa, my daughter-in-law, whisper whined. "It is cruel to watch him linger." Then lower, sharp enough to slice. "Honestly, it might be better if he just slipped away." Everyone would be relieved. Everyone. That word hit me harder than the pneumonia. Everyone did not include a small girl saving a seat for me on a porch step. Everyone did not include a room full of second graders who would never know my name but would sit on pillows my wife begged the PTA for. Everyone felt like a door being shut from the other side. Rosa's hand tightened around mine under the blanket, one clean squeeze, as if she knew I had felt the knife and needed a tourniquet. She did not say a word. She did not have to. Her palm said, "I heard it too." And in that little box of space, the thin aisle of air between beeps, I fell through a trap door into memory. Caleb at 12, glass on the workshop floor, eyes wide. "You break it, you fix it," I had said, and for a long time I believed he took that lesson into his bones. Caleb at 18, his first apartment, me installing a ceiling fan while he talked about internships. Caleb at 30, his wedding toast about foundations that hold. Where did the tilt begin? Did Nora, with her soft translator's heart, hold us in a shape we mistook for sturdiness? Did I teach my son to balance numbers and forget to teach him how to count people? When they left, I counted my breaths with the beeps. If I could stack them high enough, I would climb out of the bed with them. The doctors called it acute respiratory failure. Caleb called it unsustainable. I called it a battle and decided I was not dying on their schedule. That decision did not make the work easier. It made it honest. I measured time by indignities I learned to endure and then master. The first time the therapist pulled me upright, my vision went black at the edges and the world whined like a kettle left on the stove. I felt sweat spring from places I did not know could sweat. "Back down," the therapist said, but pride is a stubborn horse. The second time I made it to the chair shaking like a leaf that had not gotten the message that fall was over. On the third try I stood and watched my toes. They were still mine. I told them so. The ventilator weaning started in shy inches. They turned the settings down the way a mother loosens her hand from a child crossing a street, slowly, ready to grab back. Panic slid up my throat more than once. I learned to ride it, to breathe with the machine instead of against it, to let the push be help rather than insult. When they pulled the tube at last and the air touched my throat naked, it felt like swallowing knives. Nurses cheered small, the way people do at the end of a difficult song. Food came back as a spoonful of pudding to prove I would not drown on it. I had never respected pudding. I did that day. The swallow therapist watched my neck like it was a shoreline where a tide might surprise us. "Good," she said. "Again." I did not tell her I was doing it for a porch swing and a jar on a dresser that said library money in my wife's handwriting. I learned the plastic spirometer, the one that looks like a child's toy with a floating ball. 3 sets of 10 every hour I was awake, Rosa said, and she was right about the rent. I kept that ball up until my chest burned and the world brightened, until the ache under my ribs felt like proof rather than punishment. Every hour was a small rescue, a little theft of life back from whatever waited behind the curtain with eager hands. Between sets, I wrote on the pad when my hands were steady enough. Ellie, daffodils, Will. The letters staggered, but they were mine. I said nothing to Caleb the next time he stepped in, careful not to crease his suit on the chair. I did not have the voice, and he did not bring questions anyone could answer with a nod. He spoke in logistics and left in a blur of cologne and urgency. The social worker gave me a brochure about rehab facilities and information on power of attorney. The edges of the paper were too sharp. I bled a little on one. It felt correct. I thought of Caleb saying significant. I thought of Nora's palm on my back when I could not sleep the week after the funeral. "Be kind or be quiet," she would say about people who did not know better. I was done being quiet, so I counted. 10 breaths, then 10 more. I learned to sit, then stand, then pivot. I let strangers wash me and thanked them without choking on the humiliation. I learned the schedule of the floor by its smells. I prayed the way a man prays when the only chapel he has is a rectangle of ceiling tile. I promised things I intended to keep. If I get out, I will make paper stand where people fell. If I get out, I will put Nora's name on a door that opens for children. If I get out, I will stop pretending that blood alone is a bond. The numbers improve because bodies are stubborn if you give them a reason. Mine had found one. By the 3rd week, the silence became its own kind of answer. The days were a loop, breathing drills, sponge baths, pudding I respected. The clock that kept insisting morning existed. Rosa taped Ellie's drawing where I could see it and called me stubborn when I pushed the spirometer ball high enough to make my ribs complain. I held on to anger because it kept the air moving. Caleb did not come. He texted the social worker once, she said, with a question about discharge timelines, as if I were a package with tracking. On a Thursday that smelled like disinfectant and coffee, a man filled my doorway and knocked on the metal frame with a knuckle. Ray Bennett. We had fished together on Saturdays before our knees started voting against early mornings. I had not seen him since Nora's service. He looked at the monitors like they might bite him, then looked at me as if to make sure I was real. "Well, hell," he said softly. "You look like you owe somebody money, and they came to collect." I smiled with my eyes. My throat could not carry much sound. He edged past the machines and took the chair like it was a test. "I should have been here sooner," he said, working his cap in a circle. "Word gets around slow unless someone wants it to get around fast. I heard from Donna at the post office, then I drove by your place to see for myself." He stopped, and the air changed. "There is a lockbox on your front door," he said. "One of those realtor deals. Your porch swings off the chain, leaned against the house like a chair at a yard sale. Blue tape on the walls inside where somebody's planning paint. Tessa's folks were there with measuring tape, talking about taking down the wall between your kitchen and dining room to open the space up. A man I did not recognize was in your workshop buying your table saw off a guy who says he is helping Caleb clear things while you are indisposed. The freezer looked like a raccoon had been through it. The jar on the dresser, library money, gone. There were boxes labeled donate and sell. Somebody had your tackle box open on the porch like it was theirs. I felt something hot and clean move through my chest that had nothing to do with fever. Rosa's hand found my wrist and steadied it. Ray kept going, quiet and precise like a man reading a report. "There is a listing draft on the neighborhood Facebook page," he said. Not live, but the words are there. "Charming transitional property, motivated family, bring your vision." They had a stager walking through, making notes about dated personal items. She put a post-it on Nora's teacups that said, "Edit." He let the words sit there. I swallowed. It hurt, but pain was a more honest friend than what Ray had just described. I managed, in my papery voice, "Caleb?" Ray nodded once. "He told Earl he is managing your estate proactively. Said it was for your own good and avoids chaos later. Earl told him you are alive, and that sounded like an inconvenient footnote. Caleb said he has a mail forward in place to his house so nothing gets missed. Donna flagged it because the signature did not look like yours. But he told her he had paperwork. Maybe he does. Maybe he does not." I stared at the ceiling tile with the brown water ring and tried to keep my breathing even. I had not signed a thing. My house was still my house. And yet there was a lockbox on my door that I had not approved, blue tape on walls that held the ghost of Nora's back when she leaned there to put on her boots. Rosa adjusted the bed a notch so I could see Ray without pulling at the stitches under my ribs. He watched my face the way fishermen watch a bobber, ready for the tug. "Say the word," he said, "and I will go take the swing back off the ground. I will stand on your porch like an ugly lawn ornament until somebody brings a sheriff's paper, and then I will read it. I will take pictures of everything and send them to whatever lawyer you trust most. I will put your tackle box in my truck and dare anyone to reach for it. I will tell the stager to go edit her own life." I blinked hard once. That was yes. Rosa brought the drawer with my few things. I scratched in the pad, keys in drawer, and slid the ring toward Ray. He took it like it weighed more than metal. "I should have been here sooner," he said again, softer now, like an apology he needed to set down. "But I am here." After he left, the room felt both bigger and smaller. Bigger because there were people moving in my house who did not ask. Smaller because the field of action had narrowed to paper and breath. I had taught my son what to do when you break something. You fix it. He had taken the first half of that sentence and turned it into a business model. Rosa tucked the blanket and looked me in the eye. "You breathe," she said. "Your friend will do the walking." I breathed. Between sets on the spirometer, my mind walked the rooms Ray had described. Nora's teacups, each with a thin crack she would ignore until she could not. The porch swing that had caught our granddaughter's shoes and her stories. The jar from our dresser and the way her handwriting leaned right on the M in money. I felt grief move over, make room for something sterner. Greed is loud. Grief is heavy. Resolve is quiet and sharp. I held it like a tool and pictured every signature I would refuse to give, every signature I would give that would lock a door behind me. I did not know yet exactly what papers or which office, only that there would be paper with my name on it that told the truth. Paper that would stand where people had fallen. Caleb did not visit that week, or the next. The social worker brought me a message he had left. "Please let me know when Dad is discharge ready so we can coordinate placement." Placement. As if I were a refrigerator being moved to the basement. Rosa did not comment. She just set the spirometer on the tray and tapped it with her nail. I lifted the ball and kept it there until the burn in my chest felt like a promise kept to myself. Rehab days ran like drills. Stand, sit, breathe. Count to 10, then 20. The walker felt less like a surrender and more like a tool. Rosa called me stubborn and taped Ellie's crayon daffodils above the clock so I could measure progress against something that mattered. By the end of week 4, I could cross the corridor without the world dimming at the edges. The therapist clapped like I had just lifted a car off a child. I only thought, good. Now let me out. I did not leave against medical advice. I left with it. Home health lined up. Oxygen for stairs I refused to fear. A list of exercises. A card with Rosa's handwritten note. Breathe like it owes you rent. I put it in my pocket like a saint's medal. Earl and Ray rolled up in Earl's truck at 9 sharp. Earl handed me my coat like a man swearing an oath. Ray set a folder on my lap. Photographs. The lockbox on my door. Blue tape on my living room wall. A stranger's hands on my table saw. He had printed the timestamps big enough for a judge to read without glasses. First stop, I rasped. Post office. Donna at the counter went soft around the eyes when she saw me, then hard when she heard about the mail forward. I had a feeling, she said, sliding a form across the counter. She notarized my signature herself and keyed something into her terminal with the decisive taps of a woman who had no patience for thieves. The forward is canceled. Any mail already diverted will return to us. I'll call you when it lands. Second stop, I said. My porch. We turned onto my street and saw the stager's car nosed up to my curb like a cat about to steal from the counter. Through the window I spotted 2 people with clipboards in my living room, standing where Nora used to match socks and hum. They wore the expression of tourists who think they have found a ruin ripe for plunder. Earl parked crooked on purpose. Ray took my elbow. I did not bring the walker inside. I wanted my first steps there to be mine. I opened my own door with my own key and let it swing wide. The pair spun. The woman closest to Nora's teacups raised her hands like I had surprised a raccoon. Showings are by appointment, she said, recovering into a smile that had sent 1,000 homeowners into bad decisions. Lucky for you, I answered, voice low but steady. The owner is home, and the appointment is never. Ray lifted his phone. Documenting lawful request to vacate, he said, because he enjoys saying things that make people blink. The man with the clipboard stammered something about family authorization. I let him finish the sentence so it would sound foolish in the air and then pointed to the door. Out. They went. On the porch, Earl removed the lockbox with a screwdriver and handed it to me. I set it gently in the trash can like a snake I had killed. Inside, things had been moved. Not much, but enough to make a house feel questioned. I took down the blue tape like I was removing bandages. Ray rehung the porch swing. Earl checked the workshop. Tackle box gone, table saw gone, but the wall hooks they had not understood were still there. He whistled, low and murderous. Third stop, I said. Harlan. Attorney Harlan was waiting in his conference room with a stack of documents and the look of a man who still believed paper could be a shield if you sharpened it enough. He did not ask about my son. He did not need to. Ray's photograph spoke, and my face finished the sentence. We do 4 things today, Harlan said. 1. Deed. We move the house into a revocable trust in your name as trustee. No one touches it without your hand. 2. Will. We put your intent in language that does not give an inch. The no contest clause will make any challenge expensive and short. 3. Health and finance. Durable powers of attorney naming who you trust. He nodded at Earl, who looked like he would rather be anywhere than in a lawyer's office, and yet did not flinch. And revoking anyone else. 4. Notice. Certified letters to your son, his wife, and her parents, plus the brokerage, the stager, and any contractor who set foot in your home. No authorization, no access. Trespass will be enforced. We send a copy to the precinct and the postmaster, and we freeze any account that has your name next to his. He slid a pen across the table. My hand shook for a breath and then steadied when ink touched paper. I signed the deed transfer to the Hale Family Trust. I initialed the will where it named the Nora Hale Memorial Fund as beneficiary for the bulk of my estate: school libraries, band instruments, scholarships for aides who wanted to become teachers. I signed the powers naming Earl as the person who could speak when I could not, because he already had when I lay looking at ceiling tiles. Add one more, I said, voice gravel and certainty. Remove my son from any medical access. If he calls, tell him to ask my lawyer. Harlan smiled without warmth and added the page. By noon, the county clerk had time-stamped the deed. The recorded copy came back across the desk with the dull thunder of a door closing just the way you meant it to. Harlan's assistant stood at the postage machine like an artillery officer, spitting out certified labels. Earl took the envelopes like orders. Ray kept taking pictures, because truth is better with receipts. We drove back to the house. I walked it room by room, not to check their work, but to remind the walls who had lived here. In the bedroom, I opened the dresser and found the jar. The label was gone, but my wife's handwriting leaves ghost impressions even when the ink is stripped. There were 2 crumpled bills inside. I put them back and set the jar on the mantel where anyone could see it and misunderstand it on their way out the door. Password protect the utilities, Earl said, reading from Harlan's list. Every account gets a code. No changes without it. We spent the afternoon doing the unglamorous math of defense. Utilities, banks, insurance, new passwords and passphrases, secret questions only Nora would have known and only I still remember. Donna called from the post office to confirm the forward was dead and my box would be held. Harlan emailed the filed deed and a file of the no trespass notices for me to print and post. Ray taped one inside the front window where a stager would see it before she saw her own reflection. When the phone finally buzzed with Caleb's name, I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that sounded like a man startled by a noise in his own house. Dad, we need to coordinate the contractors. There's a lock on the... Did you put a lock on? Call me. We need to be practical. Practical. I sat at Nora's desk where I had signed our first mortgage and wrote 3 words on a yellow pad. We are done. Then I crossed them out. Not yet. There was one more move to make, and I wanted him close enough to see it. Tomorrow, Earl said, setting the dead lockbox at my feet like a trophy. We change every cylinder on every door. Tonight I will sit on your porch with a thermos, and if anyone tries a key that does not belong to him, I will smile and call a patrol car. Tomorrow, I agreed. Today we breathe. I took the spirometer out of my pocket and set it on the desk. I raised the ball and held it there until the ache under my ribs clarified into resolve. The house was quiet, but it was my quiet again. The papers were signed. The trust was recorded. The notices were sent. The locks would turn for me and no one else. Ready then. Let him come with a folder and a soft voice and words like practical. Let him ask for signatures. I had my own paper now, and it did not tremble when I held it. I woke before dawn and made a list. No speeches, no pleading, paper, witnesses, and a closed door at the end. I tested my lungs the way a mechanic tests a belt. Slow pull, listen, adjust. The spirometer ball sat high for a slow count of 5. Good enough. I dressed in the shirt Nora always said made me look like I knew what I was doing. I was not meeting a son. I was meeting a claimant. At 8, Earl swapped every lock cylinder and handed me the only set of keys. Ray walked the house with his phone, time-stamping every room. Teacups back in the cabinet, blue tape gone, the swing rehung, the no trespass notice in the front window. He printed a second set of photos at the pharmacy and set them on the kitchen table like evidence in a neat row. Donna from the post office called to confirm the mail forward was dead and that she had pulled all diverted items for pickup. Harlan sent the county-stamped deed to the trust, the will with the no contest clause, the power of attorney revocations, and the certified mail receipts. I slid them into a plain folder labeled with a single word, filed. The house was quiet. I walked it room by room and inventoried what mattered out loud, the way you do after a storm. Nora's jar, now on the mantel. Ellie's drawing, taped to the bookcase. The toolbox in the hall closet, where a man who knows how to look would never think to look. The important documents went into the fireproof safe with the new code. Everything that could be moved had a place that led nowhere but back to me. I set the stage for what was coming. On the kitchen table, the trust binder opened to the first page, the will flagged where names mattered, the revocations on top, the police incident number Harlan had pulled for prior trespass. Ray's photographs with dates large enough to read without glasses. On a separate sheet I wrote the names of everyone who had tried my door without permission and the dates they had done it. Facts do not raise their voices. They do not need to. Witnesses. Earl on the porch with a thermos and the calm face that makes men behave. Ray in the living room chair by the window, phone on his knee, not hiding it. Harlan on speakerphone, line open, his clock set to record. I called the non-emergency number and requested a welfare standby if needed. There is a family dispute about property, I said. We are safe. We want it to stay that way. The dispatcher took my name and the address and told me to call if voices rose. They would not mine. Security, utilities and banks now password protected, beneficiaries updated, health information access revoked. Doorbell camera active because common sense is not paranoia. A spare oxygen tank by the couch in case my throat tightened. A chair placed where I could sit with my back to a wall and the table between us. When you cannot outmuscle a situation, you outprepare it. I rehearsed my lines once in the empty kitchen. Not for drama, for control. Caleb, you are here as a guest. Sit if you like. Nothing leaves this house. You will not touch a document. You will not touch a doorknob. You will listen. If you raise your voice, you will leave. If you refuse, you will wait for an officer with me on the porch. I have executed new documents. The house is in trust. My will directs funds to the Nora Hale Memorial Fund and other educational purposes. There is a no contest clause. Your powers have been revoked. You no longer have access to my medical information or my accounts. You listed my home. You changed my mail. You authorized strangers in my kitchen. You removed tools from my workshop. These are trespasses and conversions. I am choosing not to press charges today. Do not make me change my mind. Going forward, contact my attorney. If you arrive without invitation, you will be trespassing. No apologies. No justifications. No history lesson. If he asked why, I would tell him the truth in one sentence he would recognize from his own mouth. Because it is practical. I texted him at 9 on the dot because I wanted a record. Come by at noon. We will discuss the house. Nothing more. Keep him from thinking. Keep him moving. Then I waited the way I learned to wait in the hospital. Breathe, count, prepare the next breath. Rose's card lay under my palm. Breathe like it owes you rent. I did. The fear was there, a thin wire under the skin, but it had nothing to carry. Determination had cut the current. I looked around my kitchen one last time and named what was about to happen so I would not romanticize it. This would not be reconciliation. This would be a boundary set with paper and daylight. This would be a father turning a son into a stranger for the sake of everything the father loved that the son could not see. It would be cold. It would be final. It would be mine. He arrived at noon with a folder and a face that expected cooperation. I was already at the table, papers in a neat fan, Earl on the porch with his thermos, Ray by the window with his phone. I did not offer coffee. I did not stand. You left me there to rot, and you know, I said. The room went so still I could hear the second hand on the wall clock. You know what you said behind that curtain? You know what you put on my door. You know what you took from my workshop. So do not come in here and call it help. Color rose in his cheeks. Dad, that is not fair. We were trying to be practical. You were intubated. No one knew if I would die, I finished. You said it would be a relief. You called my breath unsustainable. You drafted a listing. He opened the folder, slid 3 pages across the table like a hand in a game he assumed he had already won. This will clean everything up. Retitle the house, consolidate accounts, name me and Tessa as executors with authority. Standard. It keeps probate simple and puts the property in motion while you focus on... Breathing? I asked. You tried to put the house in motion while I learned to swallow pudding without drowning. He flinched, then collected himself the way men do when they remember a script. Dad, do not make this emotional. I am talking about stability. For you. For Ellie. For all of us. For Ellie? I said softly. You took the jar her grandmother labeled library money off my dresser. You put a lockbox on my door. You sold my saw and opened my tackle box like you were dividing loot after a storm. He straightened. We had authorization. From whom? I lifted my hand. Never mind. Here is what is true. I turned the binder so he could read the tab. The house is now in the Hale Family Trust. I am trustee. The deed is recorded. This is a copy with the clerk's stamp. No one touches a shingle without my hand. I slid the will next. This is my new will. It funds the Nora Hale Memorial Fund to support our school libraries, band programs, and scholarships for AIDS. It contains a no-contest clause stout enough to bankrupt anyone who thinks grief makes me gullible. Your access to my medical and financial information is revoked. Here are the signed revocations. Your mail forward is canceled. Here are the certified receipts to your house, to the stager, to your in-laws, and to the brokerage. Here is the incident number for the trespass on my porch and the conversion of my property. Ray laid his photos beside the documents with times and dates printed large. The lockbox, the blue tape, a stranger's hands on my saw. Caleb scanned the pages, read nothing, and reached for indignation instead. You are being manipulated. Who put this in your head? Earl? That ambulance chaser Harlan? This is not what Mom would have wanted. She wanted family to... Do not use your mother, I said, voice low enough to be dangerous. She spent 38 years buying books for other people's children. She is the reason there will be a reading room with her name on it. She is the reason that when you call legacy, I hear shelves. He swallowed and tried a gentler angle. Dad, please. We are your family. We are trying to keep things from getting messy. They are already messy, I said. You made them so when you tried to tidy me into a ledger. Hear me now. I placed a single page on top of the stack, the one Harlan had printed in bold. Notice of revocation and no authorization. You will not enter my home again without invitation. You will not represent yourself to anyone as my agent. You will not touch a document in this house. You will not touch a doorknob. If you do, I will press charges. Not because I am angry, though I am, but because it is practical. He stared at the paper and then at me, something like panic thinning his voice. You cannot cut me out. I am your son. You cut yourself out when you stood at the foot of my bed and wished me quiet. I leaned forward, elbows careful on the table my hands had sanded 40 years ago. There is one thing left to discuss. You will return what you took, the saw, the tackle box. Anything else that left this house goes back on my porch by Friday at 6. There is a letter in your hand with those terms. If the deadline passes, Harlan files. There are photographs, there are witnesses, there is paper. He shuffled the folder, hands not as steady as he wanted them to be. We can still come to an arrangement, he said. I can make this easier. You already did, I answered and nodded at Ray. He tapped his phone. This conversation is recorded, Ray said, calm as a lake at dawn. Caleb went very still. His eyes hardened. Then, like a man watching a deal slip, he grabbed for one last trick. He pulled out a clean set of documents thick with tabs and slid them toward me. Just sign these, he said, voice low and urgent. Do it for Ellie. For me, I did not bother to look. I picked the top page up with both hands and tore it down the middle, then quarters. The sound was clean and final. He twitched, like the paper had torn something inside him. He reached into the folder again, desperation showing its teeth. Dad, please, he said. Please do not do this. Tessa's parents, he ran out of sentence. You left me there to rot, and you know it, I said again, softer now. You measured my breaths in dollar signs. You called my home a transitional property. You put your boot on my porch and your hand in my drawers. I am not punishing you. I am protecting what your mother loved. He slid to his knees then, not graceful, the way a man collapses when a scaffold gives. His mouth worked around something he could not bring himself to say. He held the torn halves out like a child holding puzzle pieces he does not know how to fit. I am your legacy, he said. No, I answered. You are my son. Those are different things. I put the quarters of paper in my mouth, chewed once, twice, let the pulp soften, and spat the pieces back into my palm. I laid them in front of him. Here, I said. Take what you came for. He rose too fast, the chair behind him skidding into the wall. He gathered his folder with hands that shook and looked at Earl on the porch, at Ray by the window, at the document spread like a verdict. For a heartbeat I thought he might throw something. Instead he straightened his jacket, found what was left of his pride, and walked to the door. At the threshold he turned. We are done, he said, aiming to wound. In that, I said, we finally agree. Going forward, talk to Harlan. He left. The door closed with the weight of a gavel. Earl exhaled. Ray set his phone down and rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. I sat very still and felt the tremor run out of me. Outside, the swing creaked once in the slight wind. I looked at Nora's jar on the mantel and Ellie's drawing taped to the bookcase. Suns with green legs and a house with a music note chimney. My lungs ached, but it was the honest ache of use, not the panic of drowning. In the quiet that followed, I dialed Harlan. It is done, I said. Send the follow-ups. Already in your inbox, he replied. I hung up and opened the window an inch. The house breathed with me, slow and on purpose. I had chosen a harder ending. The family connection was lost. The truth had won. And somewhere, a room with my wife's name on the door would open, and children would sit on new pillows and read books that did not have to be borrowed. That was the legacy I could live with. That was the legacy I would leave. 3 months later, I cut the ribbon on a bright room that had been a storage closet at Edison Elementary and was now the Nora Hale reading room. The librarian cried. I did not. I stood under the new sign and felt something unclench that had been locked since the first cough rattled me toward the intensive care unit. Ellie held my hand in both of hers and asked if the beanbags came in purple too. They did not yet. We would fix that. Caleb did not come. He sent an email that read like a closing argument and ended with the words, "We are done." In that he was right. I answered with a single sentence that I had rehearsed and rewritten until it could be read without breaking my voice. When you are ready to be a son rather than a beneficiary, my door is open. Until then, my lawyer will answer anything further. It was a clean cut, and like all clean cuts, it bled. I am not a hero. I am a man who learned too late to stop apologizing for breathing. I do not pray for revenge anymore. I pray for quiet rooms with shelves that are never empty. I pray for teachers who do not have to buy their own chalk. I pray for my granddaughter to grow up in a town where the word legacy means more than an address and a bank account. The ending to this is not triumphant. It is honest. The family connection was lost. The truth won. And when I walk past the reading room and hear the low roar of children pretending to be quiet, I think that this is what survival is for. Not to keep a house warm for people who would rather see you slip away, but to light a place where strangers become less so, because a book with their name inside found them at exactly the right time.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.